Hello again! It's so nice of you that you have found your way to another book cosplay video of mine. In this one I'm going to show you how I made Gwyneth Berdara's priestess's robes from A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. For this I came up with my own design, because the priestess's clothes are described from being far from matronly hugging the curves of their bodies. But I wanted to have something a little more form-fitting, at least for the top of the dress. But I tried to match the pale blue-grey color the dress is supposed to have and the billowing, artfully twisted and layered looks of the robes. I only had 2 weeks to make the whole cosplay, so there wasn't enough time for me to order my fabrics online, but my dear friend Anna saved me and drove me to a local fabric store where she helped me to choose the right fabrics. And here they are. I'm starting with this wonderful viscose. It's super soft and has a great fall. I'm going to use this for the basic dress, which means for the top and for the skirt. I have 5 meters in total, so let's see how big a skirt I can make out of this. Then we have some simple white cotton with a great structure to it, which is going underneath this beautiful lace. I'm going to use this for some details, and I think if I'm not using too much of this, it's going to look awesome. So here we have a mesh, which is originally a lining fabric, but it just looks so beautiful. I'm going to use this for the cape, and it's really such a flowy material, and it's going to be epic. And here we have some blue satin, which I'm going to use for the sleeves, and some more lace, which I'm going to use for the top of the sleeves and to give some and to add some details for the neckline. And yes, some beautiful white and silver trim, which I'm using for some details as well. So here we have the patterns that I already made for Gwyn's dress. I'm going to make a basic simple dress. I patterned out a basic top, which is made out of 2 different pieces, one here at the front and one at the back. I added a V neckline to it, which is hopefully going to be filled with some lace if I have some left over, but I don't need much, so I think this won't be a problem. For the sleeves, they will be at full length, but the top part, which I patterned here, will be made out of lace as well. And then I'm going to add the satin, and I'm going to add a lot of it, so the sleeve will be really voluminous. And here we have some panels which will lay atop of the skirt. I'm not so sure yet if I want to sew them directly to the waistline, or maybe I'll add them to the belt, which I'm also going to make, by the way. So I can take them off if I want to. I'm not so sure about that part. This is the top part of my coat. I wanted it to be out of some stiffer fabric, so it has a nice structure. And it also has this high collar for modesty reasons. It's a little contradicting the neckline, but yeah. What can I say? I wanted this dress to be a little more extra. And I'm going to add the mesh that I showed you earlier. Yeah, well, here around this line, and get that at the top, and then it's going to flow dramatically to the ground. Let's start with cutting out the pattern of my fabric. I started with cutting out the top, front and back pieces out of the viscose. I could place the front piece on the fold, but the back pieces have to be separated because I want to add a zipper at the back. I also mark all the notches and darts. I cut out the top pieces a second time to use that for the lining. Then I cut out the skirt. The biggest challenge was to find enough space to spread the fabric on the floor, but I managed somehow. If you are curious about how to make a circle skirt, there are multiple websites which will do the math for you. You only have to measure the circumference and the length the skirt should have. I ended up making a full circle skirt instead of a 3/4 circle skirt, since I had enough fabric. The next step was to add the pockets. Since I added pockets to Alina's kefta, I never want to make another cosplay without pockets. So I cut out 4 pocket pieces and laid each one to a side seam of my 2 skirt pieces, with right sides facing each other. Then I sewed them down within the seam allowance of the side seam of the skirt. Next I folded the pockets away from the skirt and gave it a good press with my iron. Then I sewed the skirt together at the side seams and around the pockets. I ended up replacing the pockets because the stiff fabric made the skirt stick out weirdly. I used some leftover satin instead, and that worked perfectly. Next I sewed my top pieces together, one outer layer and one for the lining. I also sewed in all the darts I marked earlier. Then I placed both layers on top of each other with right sides facing each other, and I sewed them together at the neckline. The bottom edge and the back opening don't have to be sewed together, but you can baste them together after you've turned the top inside out. Cut some notches into the seam allowance of the neckline so the fabric can lay flat once you've turned the top inside out. The next step was to sew the top to the skirt and add an invisible zipper. Therefore, I cut an opening to the back of the skirt where I would later place the zipper. Then I made some gathering stitches at the top edge of the skirt. I lined up the bottom edge of the top and the upper edge of the skirt and pinned them together. I paid attention to line up the side seams. Now I could sew along the edge and add the zipper. And ta-da! It's a dress! I love how neat the neckline looks. The dress still needs some sleeves, and because I just have to be extra, I made them out of 2 pieces. I cut the top part out of lace and the lower part out of satin. Small spoiler, I really disliked the look of the satin and ended up replacing it with the mesh from the cape. I also messed up the pattern, so the shape of the sleeve was all wrong. And I burned the satin while ironing the sleeves. If that wasn't a sign, I don't know. Anyway, I sewed the satin and the lace together and sewed the trim on top of the seam. I also removed the lace again later, but it was getting too much. But the next step was to sew the long edges of the sleeves together. Then I could place them to the armholes. As far as I can remember, I managed to sew the sleeves on right at the first time, which is definitely an achievement for me. I also stitched some of the trim above the seam of the armholes and I kept it there. I had enough left of the lace to cut out a triangle and add it to the neckline. I stitched it in by hand so the stitches would be invisible. So here's the dress with the sleeves. I think the satin makes it look like an ill-fitting cheap Halloween costume, but trust the process. Now on to the belt. First I cut out the panels which are hanging down from the belt. One time out of the white cotton and one time out of the blue and silver lace. There are 5 panels in total, 2 small, 2 medium and 1 large panel. I placed the lace on top of the cotton and basted the layers together. Then I added silver bias tape around the edges. To make the actual belt, I measured my waist again and multiplied it by 2. I cut out a rectangle with this length and a width of 9 cm out of satin. The seam allowance is already included here. Then I cut out 2 rectangles out of stiffer fabric from my fabric stash, with the length of the circumference of my waist. And I cut out 2 rectangles out of satin again, which had the length of half of my waist measurement. I sewed the small satin rectangles left and right to the stiffer fabric. This is the back side of my belt. Then I sandwiched the belt panels between the long satin rectangle and the back side. The belt pieces are laying on top of each other with right sides facing each other, the top edges of the panels between them. I sewed around the edges of the belt within the seam allowance. I left an opening at the middle of the top edge to turn the belt inside out, but before I did that, I cut the corners of the seam allowance, so the fabric can lay nice and flat. After turning the belt right side out, I sewed it completely close and hand stitched a pretty silver closure to the ends of the belt. The belt wraps around my waist 2 times and closes in the front. The stiff fabric keeps the satin of the first layer from wrinkling too much. Now it's time to make the cape. First I cut out the shoulder part out of white cotton 2 times and 1 time out of the lace. I basted the lace to 1 layer of the white cotton and sewed the pieces of each layer together. Then I cut out the actual cape. This was so difficult since I really don't have enough space to lay down the fabric properly. I also cut out the new sleeves out of this fabric and replaced the satin with them. You can also see that I improved the pattern for the sleeves. They look so much better now. After I cut out the cape, I basted it onto the lower edge of my lining layer for the shoulder part. You can also see that I already sewed on one side of the bias tape to the right side of the outer layer with the lace. I placed the lining on top of the lace with right sides facing each other. Then I sewed them together at the lower edge while sandwiching the bias tape and the cape between the layers. I turned the shoulder part inside out and basted the front and upper edges together. Then I could add the bias tape to these edges as well. I sewed on the same closure as I used for the belt to the front of the shoulder part. I love how the cape turned out, just as I have imagined it. Since all priestesses wear hoods, I had to make one too. I came up with the pattern for the hood and cut it out once more of my cotton and lace. I still don't have perfected the art of making hoods. Can someone please teach me how to shape them right? Anyway, the hood was good enough for me. I added silver bias tape to the bottom edge of the hood and hand stitched it to the cape. I will show you the result right after I finished the headpiece. It was absolutely unnecessary to craft Gwyn's headpiece since she isn't wearing hers. But my 1 AM brain was like, let's make some jewelry even if we don't know how. So I got out my polymorph and my silicone mold and crafted some parts for the jewelry, which I connected with wires and silver chains. I used a thin wire which I bent into circles, then I twisted the edges around each other. I used the smallest mold to make some hemispheres. I heated up the polymorph with my heat gun to melt it, so I could stick in the wires I prepared. For the main piece, which would sit right on my forehead, I made a highly embellished piece and added an oval and a sphere which would hang down from it. Since the polymorph hasn't cooled down completely yet, I was able to bend it a little so it would better fit to my forehead. Then I took my silver chain and bent open the last link. Like this, I could connect the polymorph pieces. I also made some strings of silver and blue pearls, which should later frame my face. To hold the headpiece in place on my forehead, I added an elastic cord, which I simply knotted onto the silver chains. I later glued the middle part of jewelry to my forehead with mastics to secure it even more, and it held up pretty well. The last step was to paint the polymorph parts I crafted. I used a mixture of silver, blue and pearly white. I avoided doing the most annoying part of sewing until the end, and that's hemming the skirt. But at least the fabric had enough time to hang around and pull itself into shape. I had to cut off quite a lot of fabric at the bottom, but then I was able to fold over the edges and sew it down. Two days before the convention, the cosplay was done, and we were all super excited to go to the Netherlands and attend Elfia there. It is a beautiful outdoor convention with beautiful photo locations and even more beautiful people. Originally, we were 6 cosplayers who cosplayed from the ACOTAR series, but at the con we bumped into a Dutch group who were doing Tamlin, Lucien, Rhys and Springcourt Feyre. We just matched perfectly, and I don't just even mean our cosplays, but also our personalities. We ended up spending the whole weekend together, taking pictures and tasting the fine Elfian meat. We were a group of 10 ACOTAR cosplayers. The weekend was just so much more magical than I could have ever imagined. I'm so happy that my friend Shua, who cosplayed Azriel, gave me the idea to make Gwyn, and that she borrowed me her beautiful wig, which she got from Wickes Fashion, by the way. And because making this video took me so long, I already ordered my own wig from the same brand, and the quality is just... If you want to see more pictures we took that weekend, then check out my Instagram and those of my friends. I will link everyone down below. If you enjoyed watching this video, then please consider giving this a thumb up. And if this video inspired you to make your own Gwyn cosplay, then please feel free to tag me so I can see your beautiful creations. Stay crafty, and I see you in my next video. Bye!